Okay, we're going to get started. And we're actually shifting the schedule a little bit. We're going to go till 11:45 because you've got a pretty nice long lunch break to network and catch up on emails and phone conversations. To sort of gauge where we're at in the room, wanted to do sort of a mid-session check-in. So at Urban Strategies, we like to check in and we like to check out to get a sense of how folks are doing and to ask sort of a effective question. And so Soda is going to track this for us. So state your name, who you work for, what city you're from. That's the first question. The second question is how you're feeling at the moment, and it could be about the session, it could be about just physically how you're feeling at the moment. Then your third question, I'm going to give you the option, and we normally don't give the option, but the options are, the first question is, we've heard a lot of information thus far today. Is there something pressing between now and the end of the convening today that you would really like to get more information on, that you're not clear about, that you thought you wanted to get more information about that has not been addressed yet? That's the first option. The second option is, for those of you that know me well, know that I'm a huge college basketball fan. So the second option is, who do you think will win the NCAA championship? All right, so you can choose between those two questions. So Soda's assisting us. Those are the midday check-in questions. So why don't we start on this side of the room and start with the first row.
Check-in how I'm feeling at the moment, encouraged. We are doing some similar work that Boston Girls Credit and St. Louis Girls Credit has started, and so we are 6 months into our initiative, so I'm really encouraged about what I've heard so far, and we have a list of things to do once I return to Atlanta, which is also a good thing for me. That means I'm learning. And is there something pressing between now and the end that I'd like to address? Really just hear more from local clients and say we're a partner of ours, so I'm excited about what's coming. And who do I think will win the
Oh, then you had a choice. You didn't have to answer that one. You can answer one or the other. I know not everyone is not a zealot like I am, so all right. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Teresa Johnson, and I'm from the East St. Louis Housing Authority. I'm feeling good about the session. What I'm really interested in is Sarah, the one-on-one coaching for our residents. Our residents need financial literacy, so it's pretty good. And I've been talking to the different attendees. It's I think some insights and other things. So I'm great.
Thank you. So one-on-one financial literacy. Thank you.
Okay. Just met you in the last session. I'm Chris Hobday. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I work for Equifax. I'm feeling really energized because of the quality and quantity of questions in the last session. Thank you guys. It would have been super awkward if there were no questions, so we really appreciate that. In terms of what I'm really hoping to hear about through the end of the meeting, it's this next panel. I think you've heard my passion around rent reporting, and if we can just get more people fired up about it, it's going to have great outcomes for the people that we're serving.
Thanks, Chris. Tyler?
Hey everybody, Tyler Sawyer with Equifax out of Boston, Massachusetts. Feeling good. I mean, I thought the last session was excellent actually, and I really love the engagement from the echo what Chris said there. I thought it was great to be able to pass that mic around and really stop things with appeared to be a little bit short because there was a lot of enthusiasm. So I like that. It leaves people going. It's just working very well. On to 3D. I'm going to go with Arizona Wildcats, but that's only because my father played with them many years ago. So I got to root for everything. Right?
Nice. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Henry. I live in Villanova, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. I am feeling very encouraged to hear all about the wonderful things you guys are doing for the local communities. I think Villanova will win the NCAA
Love Jay Wright.
Our little town, we like to have all of the celebrations, and it's good for our community.
Great, thank you.
Jennifer, what do you do? What
Oh, I
organization?
work for Equifax. I work for Equifax, and I'm responsible for strategy and marketing for rental, mortgage, housing, so that's rental, mortgage, capital markets, stuff.
Thank you.
I'm Andrew Austin. I'm here from Atlanta with Greater Atlanta Coast Credit. I'll be the community engagement manager for Greater Atlanta Coast Credit, and I'll be working partnering with Equifax. So far, I'm just really informed. I think it's my third day, so it's just a great opportunity to receive a lot of information from different points of view very quickly. So it's encouraging to receive that and what I hope to get, I guess just more information of how we're gonna, how I'm gonna, kind of position this opportunity. That's it.
Thank you. In the back.
Oh. Good morning, I'm Pam Harris from North East Association. I'm feeling pretty good. And this is my second conference. We were invited through Ella and the House Ring. And
So you have an option. You can either answer what else would you like to get in the last half of the day, or you can answer who do you think will win the NCAA tournament.
okay, I would just like to learn more information, and I can say that we are closer this year with moving on with this program than we were last year.
Thank you. Thank you. And then, gentlemen, I know you're trying to get to your seat.
That's what I'd like to get out of it. I'm Mike Ziegler. I'm the Community Services Manager at the Sales Community Development, so I work with the residents who live in our affordable housing. I'm feeling grateful that there's so many people in one room. And I think one thing I'm looking forward to getting out of this is getting a more large-scale bird's eye view of higher-level issues that affect the residents that I work with kind of on a day-to-day.
Thank you. Erica.
Erica Wilson, St. Louis, USI. I'm feeling good. I'm not sweating as much anymore, so I'm excited about that. I don't know anything about these. I want to go with A. So hopefully that we are providing a platform for a lot of learning, a lot of collaboration, and opportunities for the families that we all individually support to find their path towards stable and thriving. So that's my hope for this convening as with all of today's videos that we're doing. So thank you all so much for today.
Ella.
I'm Ella Gross. I'm the tenant screening manager at the Tower Grove neighborhood CDC from St. Louis. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling grateful for the interest in what we're doing. One thing I would like to do before the end of the day is talk more about ideas that people have for changing or improving the work that we're doing.
Sean Spencer, I'm the Executive Director of the Tower Grove Neighborhood CDC. I am feeling optimistic and thankful. I really appreciate all the people that came today, especially the people that came from out of town. Not only are we educating, but we're also learning too, and this is an innovative approach to tenant screening. And we know we're here, we want to take it here, so keep giving us that feedback to help us build this program up. I think the NCAA championship, I'm a Missouri Tigers fan, so I don't really have a default, but not Kansas City.
I'm Adam Drake. I'm from St. Louis. I'm with the Tower Grove CDC. Tennis screening process for home screen. I feel good. Okay. I'm not stuck in the office right now, so it's going to be out. I think my team has answered a lot of the first question, so I answered the second question. I'm an ACC family, so I'm looking to Virginia. I haven't watched the college basketball.
Oh, I'm sorry.
James Hurd, I'm the field office director for HUD here in St. Louis. Very optimistic to see all the folks here to talk very open, frankly, about the civic subject matter. I would like to hear a little bit more from Equifax and agencies like them, how they really is looking at a certain alternative way of processing the data. Again, over the years, we know that credit was systematically used, against people of color and minorities, and so just want to see how they're going to handle that.
Great. David Stifler from St. Louis with the Equifax Foundation. I'm very hopeful. I think the fact that we have national representatives here today speaks to the growing movement towards more inclusivity and greater access to financial inclusion. I'm curious to hear more about how Notify is going to solve all of that for us.
I'm Karen Davis, president of Curry Davis Consulting Group. I'm here, I wear many hats, working with HUD, working with USDA, working with United Way, Equifax, a lot of place-based strategies in Atlanta. And so I'm hoping to gain additional knowledge and insight that I can apply across all of the work that I do in community. I'm feeling good about what I'm hearing so far, and good friends with David, but also excited to hear the passion that we get quite often in Atlanta from David, from the other Equifax team members. It's good to know that there's more of him working inside that system to promote greater access and change that could impact people of color.
Hello, I'm Danielle Besmer. I'm the Deputy Director of Operations at Seattle Housing Authority. I'm also joined by Andrew Lofton, my Executive Director, and give a step out real quickly. I'm feeling really curious today, and I'm interested in hearing more about the rental reporting and other non-traditional forms of reporting, and particularly interested in some dialogue around kind of the value proposition or story we can tell in the space, and that I can take back to my local community to really garner some additional interest, and really selling that, the top 3 things that we traditionally think about might not be the full picture. And so let's be curious about this.
Thank you.
I'm Sarah Middendorf with Prosperity Connection here in St. Louis and St. Louis Credit. I'm feeling good and excited to hear more about everybody's perspectives and ideas on how we can improve what we're doing. And something that I'd like to hear more about, rent reporting, which I know a lot about my Equifax already, but I would like to hear a lot of the other ideas and perspectives and how that can be a good way to get people's credit built.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jared Boyd. I'm Chief of Staff and Counsel in St. Louis City Treasurer's Office here. Feeling phenomenal because a lot of people were coughing and sneezing in my office yesterday. You guys all appear to be the picture of health from what I've seen today. What I'm more interested in learning about are just ways to build capacity and wealth for renters in St. Louis who make up a much larger share of the population than I think most people realize. So perhaps using rental screening both as a way to create more opportunities, but also use that as a way for other opportunities to come after that. So, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Kristen Farm, and I am the relationship manager for the rental vertical for Equifax. And right now, I'm feeling really happy because I just got coffee delivered, so I'm feeling really good about that. It's funny that you bring up the NCAA because I dated a guy that actually went to Michigan State that taught me how to do brackets. And so now every year when I do my brackets,
I know, I'm like,
they are in my final 2, and I always have them winning. And one year I actually won $400 because they weren't supposed to win, and they did. So Michigan State all the way, baby.
I'm really sorry.
Hey, I'm Patrick Hennessy. I work for a company called Yardi Systems. We're one of the largest providers of property management software globally. And I'm just here to say we can help. So thanks for having me.
My name is Tom Schuler. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm with Equifax. I'm feeling relatively germ-free thanks to this bottle of hand sanitizer that's in our baskets. And I'd like to learn more about, the rate reporting piece as well, and how we can really help the property management firms get a lot more comfortable with offering reporting, function to Equifax and frankly to all bureaus, because our position is that all bureaus should have access to this data. It's not an exclusive request. For every bureau to have access helps all consumers, right? So, as far as I don't have a horse in the race for basketball. I'm not a big basketball guy, but I'll pick the Wildcats, I guess. I take that back. Michigan State.
Yeah,
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bruce Ladd. I'm Deputy Regional Administrator with the Kansas City HUD office, and it's my pleasure, and I share the similar disdain as this other gentleman with the University of Kansas, I might add. So in Kansas City, we are still enjoying the Super Bowl victory. Might I add, we are Missouri's only professional football team. As far as what I would like to learn today, I'd like to think about how we can harness technology, particularly as we think about younger and younger people using and coming into, as they come out of the educational system, how can we utilize technology, particularly that on our phones, and so that they can improve their financial literacy and hopefully also their credit score.
Julian.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julian White, Assistant Project Manager with Urban Strategies. Based out of Atlanta, feeling good because it's been raining a lot for those who are from Atlanta. This is a good break. As far as what I'm looking forward to getting out of, just in general, I want to hear more about alternative credit, as well as soaking all this information so I can take it back to my network and so forth, and let them know that conversations like this are taking place, right? As far as NCAA championship, I'm rolling with whatever team Esther's rolling with because she cuts my paycheck every 2 weeks.
That is fascinating. All right, Mildred.
Okay, Mildred Motley. I am with East St. Louis Housing Authority, but I live in St. Louis. Let's see how I'm feeling. I'm good. We've got Pepsi, so we're all good. Snacks, all the good stuff. Actually, and I enjoy getting out of the office and meeting other people who are walking a different path than I am, because it gives you that energy that you need to go back into whatever else you're dealing with. I do not have a dog in the fight for NCAA because I always root for no one else but University of Illinois fighting Illini.
I'm Kate Fight. I work for U.S. Bank CDC, but I'm here on behalf of North Houston Association with TAM. I'm based here in St. Louis, or I live here in St. Louis. I'm feeling very inspired. This is the first conference I've been to. I signed up yesterday. Let's see, I realized I don't know a lot about the origins of why we use credit scores. It's just like a fact, it's like a piece of our lives, but I realize I want to go back and kind of feel like I need to research the origins of it, and why do we do this, and is there how can we change it, or maybe not change it. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about right now. I'm a Florida State Seminole alum, so Florida State.
My name is Tim Duncan. I'm from Boston now for the past 30 years. I have a little organization called FinTech Commons. I grew up in St. Louis, and about 12 years ago I started working with Elizabeth Warren around Dodd-Frank, maybe a little more than that now, and went to Washington with her. It was the Obama administration, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I head of technology there, did a lot of policy work around technology and credit scores and lending and payment systems, and saw, a lot of the last 40, 50 years of this country has been about, and certainly the recession in 2007 began then, is the inequality in wealth in this country between white people and people of color, which in large part was caused by a lack of access to decent financial products and services, paying higher rates, et cetera. So you can't, most people's wealth is built up in their homes, so if you can't buy a home because of redlining, you have to hire a thing that I found interesting in going into work on Dodd-Frank and in the administration was that nobody accepted any responsibility really for what happened during 2007, the housing crisis, and subprime mortgages, et cetera. It's always, well, they did it first, and they did it first, and they did it first. And, you know, for the most part, I'd like to think that people act in good faith, but it always reminded me, something came into my mind after several decades about growing up in St. Louis, which was I grew up in University City, and it's about equally black and white at the time, and I played a lot of sports. I played football, and ninth grade started playing football. I was a quarterback and safety on the team going into high school freshman on the lower level team. A guy named Pete Woods followed me up. He was a year behind. I don't know if you remember him, but he ended up starting quarterback in Mizzou for 4 years and played for the Chiefs. So I lost out. But back then, the black kids on our team, there were several positions they just couldn't play. They couldn't play quarterback. They couldn't play safety, and they probably cornerback too. So there's sort of defensive backfield and certainly quarterback. No blacks were allowed to play, despite the quality of their athleticism and their abilities, etc. And it took me a long time to even realize that I never questioned that. I never thought about that back then. People didn't talk about it. Well, there wasn't any blacks in the NFL playing quarterback. And the NFL said, well, there's not any blacks in college playing quarterback in major schools, so it's not our fault. And colleges said, well, there's not any blacks in high school playing quarterback, so it's not our fault. But the underlying message was, well, blacks aren't smart enough to play quarterback. They can't handle the position. And nobody really questioned that. Well, and this is a question for everybody to think about here. How long ago do you think it was when every NFL team finally started a black quarterback at the beginning of the game? How long do you think it took before that actually happened, where every team in the NFL had started a black quarterback at some point? What would you guess, 20 years, 20 years?
So every single team would have started one?
Finally started a black quarterback.
That's probably only a couple
Still
years
haven't
ago.
About 4 years ago. 4 years ago. So, well, it turns out, surprisingly, that blacks can't play quarterback. I don't know if you see that, but so all these assumptions that were sort of built in that nobody questioned, I've always remembered that because the same thing kind of happened in the financial system. It's not so much the intentional stuff that goes on, it's the assumptions, it's the blindness. And now I hear that it's a lot of, those things now are getting built into kind of automated systems, because the people that build them have that blindness. So I'm sorry to sort of drag on about this, but I love St. Louis, it's great being back here, and it's sort of reminded me of that. And what I'd like to learn this afternoon, which I've never learned my entire life, is what a billiton is. So.
Thank you, Tim.
Hi, I'm Tori Dickens. I'm with Beyond Housing here in St. Louis. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling curious. My pressing thing that I want to learn today is more about the rent reporting. With our resident service program, we are focusing this year, next year on homeownership expansion, and I'd like to see how we can use that rent reporting system to help our residents that are transitioning to home.
I'm April Stuffensmeyer, also with Beyond Housing here in St. Louis. As part of the Resident Services Department there, I'm interested in the rent reporting and how that can help our residents transition into home ownership.
Great, thank you. Let's go over here.
Hi, my name is Yoon Chung. I'm from St. Louis. I'm affiliated in Social Policy Institute at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm feeling good because the weather is great. Yeah, this is my first visit downtown. So feeling good and say changes. I'm not a basketball fan, but I'm a football fan. And my alma mater is Ohio State, so I play Ohio State.
Oh, Ohio State. Very good. Thank you.
So I'm Brittany Roberson. I work for Near West Side Partners in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I am the Choice Neighborhood Initiative Coordinator. How I'm feeling, honestly, a little bit over-caffeinated right now. Like over-caffeinated. All right, so first question is, well, I'm just excited to learn about all of the things. I think that in thinking about Milwaukee, we have a lot to do around like rental options from like screening all the way up and through like making sure people become homeowners. So I'm really interested to just learn about everything today. Also, with our choice neighborhood, because I am going to answer this second question because it is job security. So, and part of our choice neighborhood initiative, we are partnered with Marquette University. So I'm going with Marquette.
I'm Bobby McQuay. I work for Midwest Side Partners like Brittany, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and one of the things that I'm feeling good about this conference and being able to hear the different ideas and different perspectives and share my own from the different regions around the country. I think that that's interesting, and learning best practices is really good. My NCAA team, I'm going with Dayton. I think the underdog is going to win this year.
Interesting. Donovan.
Good afternoon. This is after my time in Cleveland. Donovan Duncan, Executive Vice President, Urban Strategies from Cleveland, Ohio. I am doing well. I'm interested in this notion of when talked about I think it was 45 million individuals who are living in rental units. Which subsection of those individuals are people of color? And then how do we build really culturally competent strategies to address that? And since this is like the Ohio section, because I've heard Dayton, so my choice was the Ohio State, right? Because everyone in Ohio is a Buckeye fan.
That's not Dayton going.
Soda.
Hi, I'm Soda from BC, but currently here in St. Louis. I'm the Executive Fellow with Urban Strategies, and I haven't answered to either of these questions. I'm not too familiar with the NCAA, and I guess as far as learning, I'm just kind of here just to learn more. So I'll echo Brittany. You said everything, so I'm right with her.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have to step out for a minute, but Craig Crabtree, I run the mortgage and housing business for Equifax here in the U.S. What's pressing, what I constantly think about, again, is the completeness and the accuracy of the data to even playing field for everyone, no matter where they are. And from a basketball standpoint, I have no idea. I have two daughters at UGA or at Georgia, and they have no chance of getting into it, but that's where my heart would be. I'm so glad to be here.
Wale, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Wale Coaxum. I'm from Cleveland. I'm excited to be here. Apologize I wasn't available to share cocktails with everybody last night. What really excites me is we were here last year, and it was just an idea, and a lot of people took a step out on faith that there was a conversation to be had, and this year is a reflection that we were on the right track. And the fact that there's so much enthusiasm about it suggests that we may be the beginning of a real movement to think differently about creating an inclusive economy. So I'm really very thrilled about that. In our household, from an NCAA basketball perspective, we have brackets. The 11-year-old won last year, so I'm not really in a good position to pick that. But I do know that we always put the MEAC team, high on our bracket in terms of how they do.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley Toussaint, also with Mocafy. So as Wally mentioned, last year we had kicked off, actually it was this time last year that we had first kicked off our partnership with Tower Grove. A year has passed, and we've had some great success, and we're looking to expand that. I'm just excited that we have so many great and willing participants and potential partners here that are really here to help us learn how we could really expand this and make this available to all renters, not only LMI renters, but renters across the income spectrum. In terms of who I hope to win, honestly, I don't really follow NCAA. I guess I grew up in New York City. There wasn't much going on there. But I did live in Philadelphia for a while, so I'm going to go with Villanova.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for your very insightful check-in comments. So, again, I'm Esther Shin, President of Urban Strategies. I'm doing extremely well today and really happy to see so many of you. Again, we've doubled the participation from last year, so it's great that this conversation continues. My team this year, I'm going with the Zags. I think that could actually be their year, but the sleeper is San Diego State. They only have one loss and probably should be ranked number 1. And for those of you that don't know how serious it is, I plan to take the first and second round off. I might be in here watching some of the games in the first and second round, so hope to see some of you there. So Stanley and Wole really don't need a moderator, and they really don't. They don't really need me up here. So I do have a few questions, but we're going to start off with if the two of you could share about Mochify. Who you are, how you got to this point, and why you thought this work was so important.
That's a great question, and it really, just to reiterate, we are fortunate to have the audience with all of you today. Some of you over the course of the years we've had a chance to meet. I probably met half of you over time, both here in St. Louis and other places, and look forward to meeting the other half of you and developing relationships. I think at a high level for me, actually the Mochify story is a bit of a St. Louis story. And so my personal journey in a nutshell was I was at Wall Street for a long time, 20 some odd years. My last job was at JP Morgan, and I was one of the most senior African Americans at JP Morgan running the sales organization for the business bank. And the big responsibility that I had was, how do you move people out of the branch to use technology as a cheaper, more efficient way to service that business customer? And the reality is like 90% of what the business customer needed, which is true for the consumer customer, could be done either through a mobile phone or at the teller. And the one that you couldn't really do was closing loan documents, but you changed that, as well as the need for cash. And that was sort of my first aha that, hey, technology can be a real driver. The personal piece of St. Louis was the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson. And watching those images as I was in my job at one of the largest banks on the planet, realizing that the struggles of that community from a social justice perspective were as serious as they were, 40, 50 years ago, and I felt like I was watching a documentary around the civil rights movement, and yet that was the current moment. And also realized that there's an important need to have an economic conversation, an economic justice conversation that's equal and as fervent, if you will, as the social justice conversation. And so I quit my job soon after that and said, hey, I would like to be a part of the solutions, because I had come to a lot of forums over time where people were really good about articulating the problem, but not so good about coming up with solutions to the problem. And I thought that what better way to think back on my career when it's time to hang up the proverbial cleats than to have said, hey, I was a part of trying to change the conversation, really geared towards communities of color, but it's not exclusive to that, because the reality is the issues that face communities of color are not dissimilar from rural communities in this country. They're not dissimilar from Hispanic communities in this country. They're not dissimilar from Indian communities in this color, but we need to have a first step to figure out what the plan is. So with that, I left in 2015 I left. We got the company started in 2016. I think Stanley joined in 2017. And we're on a mission to really use mobile as a way to reach out to communities that aren't well served. And I'm just spitballing, 50% of this country are not well served by traditional banks, and we can run through the statistics if you want to do that. But the fact is, the alternative financial services business is $190 billion a year, growing at 5%. And the banks, we have a structural problem in this country, and we've been talking about it this morning in terms of redlining, credit redlining, housing redlining. The reason I wasn't here for dinner last night was I was at the U.S. Treasury Department in the cash room on a panel that was celebrating 155 years of the Freedmen's Bureau. Right. So the Freedmen's Bureau, Abraham Lincoln signed legislation 155 years ago yesterday to create the Freedmen's Bank. And the Freedmen's Bank was just that, a place that African Americans, free African Americans could put their money. They had 100,000 depositors. They had the equivalent of 150 billion dollars in today's dollars in that bank. And it was a great example of what's possible in terms of financial inclusion. And then the bank failed, it was mismanaged, and that began the beginning of the end, quite frankly, of communities of color having faith in the banking system. And then you can go through the history lesson, right, in terms of what FDR did, in terms of the his policies around housing. You can go then in terms of what the banks did and redlining and how it plays itself to today. And the reality is African Americans have the same amount of wealth today as a percentage of the total as they did right after they'd been freed as slaves, right? That's a problem. But it's not an insurmountable problem because we are in a moment today where technology is a game changer and it's a leveler of the playing field. And between the good work of everyone in the room, you have the opportunity for public-private partnerships that weren't possible even 5 years ago. And what we're seeing in this moment as a country, there is political will around understanding these issues, having serious conversations about reparations. We can have a conversation about how you feel about that, but the point is we recognize broadly that there are structural things that have occurred that put us in this position. But with technology, with a public sector that is supportive, it's looking for tools, with corporates who are committed, and I'm really excited about Yardi and Equifax being here because they are responsible in many ways for the ability to leverage data and access people who are creating the data records. We want to talk more about that. And the work that's happening from a HUD and housing perspective, you all are the responsible for a large percentage of communities of color, and just everybody, but communities of color. And I got to tell you, 100% of people who live in public housing are renters versus the 60% of the overall African American community that's renters. And then at the same time, you have not-for-profits. And not-for-profits, in my mind, are really an efficient way to get capital into a marketplace. It's not, it's a tax structure, but not-for-profits have to have sustainable business models that support individuals that they want to help. And so I think between the not-for-profits, the for-profits, the government sector, and technology firms like ourselves and other supporters, we have an opportunity to bring a large number of people into the mainstream economy in a way that hasn't existed in this country ever. Maybe there was, you could argue from 1865 to 1873 that there was a window there, but we haven't seen that since. And so I'm really excited about that. And so anyway, back to your original question, Esther. So that's why we created the company Mocafy. And in a nutshell, what Mocafy is we're focused on 4 things. One, how do we provide low-cost banking products to people and deliver to them digitally? We're building a digital bank that's equal to Chime, Simple, all those other players. And that's the offering that we have. And the reason is you can't even begin to have a conversation with people about these kinds of things if they're not in the digital economy, right? And the statistics bear that out. African Americans spend 50% more on banking services than white people. Hispanics spend 100% more on banking services than white people. The average white person spends $8 a month, African American spends $12 a month, and a Hispanic person spends $16 a month. And I can give you the statistics and document that analysis. So first, just if you can get somebody in the digital economy, that's worth, and some analysis suggests, $40,000 over the course of somebody's life. It's a big deal, right? Second step and so we do that, check. Second step that we're focused on is, and I say it tongue-in-cheek with the team, there's a better way to describe it, but the tagline is, so you want to be a 700, right? And so we try to figure out tools to enable people to get their credit score up. And I believe that we need to shift, and that's why we're all here today, that someone's credit score shouldn't be determined based on their zip code. It should be based on their behaviors. And so how we can bring those behaviors to the fore for Equifax and others is a big deal, and rent is a natural starting point, but there are other ways to do that. And we're starting with rent, and we've got ideas in terms of how to build credit and create savings, and we can talk more about that. So that's the second piece. The third piece that we're focused on is, okay, so you got a bank account, you got a credit score that works, or that reflects who you are. And then the third piece is, okay, so you want to own a house. You want to be a homeowner, right? You want to buy that first-time house, or if you lost your house because of a set of financial circumstances, let's get you back into the market. And it's another opportunity. We see ourselves as a bridge. When I was at JP Morgan, if I were to say to a banker, hey, I'd like for you to spend a couple of hours in the public housing community in your town and come back and report to me about that, they would say, no, seriously, you want me to do that? Right? I don't even know where it is. I'm not sure I'm comfortable going there. And are there even clients there that we want to talk to, right? So we are positioning ourselves, which is why we are anxious to talk to all of you. We're excited about partnering with housing authorities. We do it in Yonkers. We do it in C&C, which is a low and moderate income housing landlord in New York. Because if we have those relationships, we can build that trust, and then we can bring the banks and others who've got the capital to really help move people forward and be a bridge and a credibility, a broker, if you will, with the individuals in those communities. So anyway, and then we've got HUD training and counseling, and we want to bring our users to the resources that exist in the various communities. And those of you who are in the build credit, whether it's in Atlanta or Boston or St. Louis and other places, we help sort of fulfill your mission. And the fourth piece that we have is, in order to close the wealth gap, housing is a big part of it. And oh, by the way, not everyone should own a house. So we should be very clear about that. But I gotta believe that if for the white community, 70% of people own houses, and black people, it's 40%. Somewhere in that 30% delta, our people should be homeowners, right? I don't know what that number is, but I know it's more than the 40. And the final piece is, around entrepreneurship. And we sort of believe that, we have an opportunity to help someone down the journey around becoming an entrepreneur, because the reality is, A, the economy is shifting big time. Gig economy workers, I think, are underrepresented in terms of the overall count of what people are doing. Second, you can't think about entrepreneurship if you don't have a bank account, if you don't have good credit, and if you don't have an asset. And our own entrepreneurial journey, we think we know a little something about this, and we can share it with others, and we want to create a healthy ecosystem. And we're actually really focused on women of color, quite frankly, this year, on the entrepreneurial journey. And so, in a nutshell, we think that we want to be a platform that facilitates the work that all of you are doing. Because what we're finding happen, we just had this, David and I had this conversation on Friday, right? There's a group in Atlanta that's trying to do some savings account strategies. It's a great program. They're like, well, the people don't have bank accounts to put the money into, right? So all this good work sort of falls short if people don't have bank accounts. And the final thing I'll say, and I'll give it to Stanley, and Stanley knows I talk too much, and so he'll kick me under the table to stop me talking. But the final thing I will say is our strategy is direct to consumer and also working with municipalities, because we think that municipalities play a very important role, whether it's here in St. Louis, and I'm looking at my friend from the Treasurer's Office, or in Atlanta, where we have, where those cities are really committed to helping individuals on the lower end of the economic spectrum, and have been banging on the big banks to say, do something, and they're like, yeah, we want to, but we don't know how. And so we think that we've got some innovative things that we're rolling out, and we'll be able to announce in a couple of weeks in terms of the first one, that reflects creating the infrastructure to help how the other half isn't banked, but bring them to the digital economy. I guess, Esther, you're right, we don't need a moderator. But Stanley, where did I get it wrong?
So I loathe following Wole. So I'll keep it short. I'll just give you a brief history of my background. So background, trained engineer, so industrial engineer, and so I work with various companies running their huge operational processes spanning from oil and gas, petrochemicals, consumer product goods. And as great as that work was, it had no tie-in to the communities that I cared about. So I was in a sweet spot in the sense of, from an age perspective, that I had the opportunity to take some risk. So I decided to leave the industry altogether and did what most people do when they're in that kind of state of uncertainty. I'm going to business school. And I thought business school I was going to figure it all out there. And during that time, just through just some connections that Wole and I had, we had the opportunity to meet. He told me about what he was doing. I didn't understand it, but I loved the mission. I loved the passion that he had for it. And he gave me like 2 selling points that I found really intriguing. One, he told me he was building out his team of Avengers, and he said I could pick which Avenger I wanted to be. I tell you which one I picked after. And 2, I expressed to him that I wanted to go to business school, and he told me that you should go, but you're only going to learn theoretical business. Come join the team and learn practical business, right? And that would be a great addition to your toolkit as you go out into the business world. So that's the start, that's the journey. It started in 2017. It's been a roller coaster, but it's been the best roller coaster ever. And I'm not just saying that just because I'm a part of the team, because I'm up here. The work that we're doing, we truly are committed to this work. We love the work that we do. And I think everyone that's in this room similarly loves the work. That's why we're all here. But yeah, I'll stop right there because I think Wole already pretty much told us about the mission and the goal of the company, and I'm happy to answer any questions that all of you may have.
So the one thing so maybe just take a second, and I'd like to open up to a conversation a little bit about rent reporting, and Stanley can talk a little bit about in more detail in terms of the logistics of it. But I think at a high level, as the first panel discussed, rent reporting is a huge opportunity to have an impact. And one of the statistics we can talk to is on our own platform, we're seeing that people, by using rent reporting, are seeing a 30 to 50 point increase in their credit score, right? And and as I've become more attuned to listening to others talk about the products and services that they offer to get credit scores up, A, they charge a lot of money. B, the impact is pretty good, 100 points, but that can take them 12 to 18 months to get there. And we're simply saying by the process of adding another trade line and the impact that can have, and we have the ability to take your rent payment history from the day you start with us. So today we could take your March payment and start to report it, or we can go back 2 years and add that to the credit score. We're seeing that has an impact. It's pretty significant pretty quickly, like within the span of 30, 60, 90 days. And the one thing that we've come across in our conversations as we try to roll this out is a couple of things. And this is where I really like all of us to maybe lean in a little bit and figure out if there is a partnership that we can collectively create. And that is, one, people are always a little concerned about the cost, right? What does it cost to roll this out, right? And so instead of fighting that battle, we've sort of said we're trying to figure out how to do it at as low cost to free as possible, right? Because what we're finding, and free to the consumer, like, so at the end of the day, the individual shouldn't have to pay for this, and because it's like counterintuitive. And when you're working with vulnerable people, I think you have to be able to put your hand on your heart and say, we're trying to do something in your best interest. I do think where the partnership comes in is whether it's the philanthropic community, whether it's the landlord community, whether it's a government entity. I've got to say there is a cost associated with delivering the service. How can we get creative in terms of paying for it? Or we just say it's just going to become free and we should just stop talking about it altogether from everybody's vantage point. Haven't quite threaded that needle yet, but I would love to have a conversation around that particular part of the conversation. The second piece is it's actually hard to get people to sign up for the program, for rent reporting. And everybody and you have a conversation, you're thinking about it intellectually, it makes a ton of sense. But I think the ability to get into a room, sign people up, get them comfortable with the process, I think, and this is not just our experience, I think it's a universal one, at least from where we sit, that it's challenging to get people to do it. And so I think what I'd love for us to think about collectively is, are there ways that it's like turning on the cell phone, or you pick up the phone and the dial tone works? Is there a partnership that exists between a Yardi and an Equifax and a group like, it doesn't have to be us, I mean, I love us, but, and a group that has the ability to be on the ground, interacting with folks, working with some of the housing authorities or landlords, so when somebody signs in, they become a tenant, they can just check a box and it's done automatically, and they don't have to think about it, right? And they understand the value, and if they think, hey, if I've got a complaint or if I've got an issue with my landlord, there's a mechanism that allows them to dispute it, that does not penalize them. What we do, and Stanley will talk about it, but we are very sensitive that we don't want, this is not here to harm the individual. We want to make this something that moves them forward. But I think in order for this to become a universal thing, if you will, in the same way that when someone writes their mortgage check and that is sent to the bank, that automatically is reported to the credit bureaus, or you pay your credit card bill, that's reported to the credit bureaus. We need to make it that simple in order for this to impact the millions of people that are renters. So I'd love for us to maybe think about how we do that and come up with that mechanism, because if we're doing it onesie-twosie in a non-systematic way, we're going to get onesie-twosie results in a non-systematic way. So that would be something I'd love for us to think about.
So Wooly teed it up great in that there has been some challenges to, one, getting people to sign up, two, getting this offering to truly scale, but we're here to be transparent about what those challenges truly are. And there's like a litany of things, I think. One, just through anecdotal feedback, a lot of landlords have a sense of apathy, like, why do I care? Why should I do this, right? So it's overcoming that piece, right? So, and there are challenges from us as a firm and us deploying this product, and there's challenges just from other landlords, property managers, software companies with how do they introduce it into the market. And those can consist of risks. As a firm, as somebody who's furnishing that data to the bureaus, you assume a certain level of liability. And who wants to take on that risk? Does the landlord want to take on that risk? Does the landlord necessarily want to hire somebody that's in charge of monitoring disputes and making sure that they're mitigated in a timely fashion? Does the software company want to do that, right? So it's understanding where that risk is and who's willing to absorb that risk. There's also a huge technological infrastructure that's needed on the part of the person that's providing that data to the credit bureaus. And I think with Maurice from the earlier panel and what we just know about property management companies, they don't have the time. So if even us as a firm, it was a big lift to introduce rep reporting into the marketplace, just imagine somebody who is resource constrained and they're dealing with a ton of issues that just come with just managing their property. How do we introduce this? How do we prioritize making the investment in the ability for our tenants to be able to report this to the credit bureaus? We care about their well-being, but we also have these other things that we're managing. There's also the educational piece, well, lack of education. Tenants themselves don't even realize, one, that rent is not on their credit report, or what the true benefits could be if it were added. I think everyone in this room intellectually knows, but some people don't know that employment is based off of how good your credit score is, and in which some employers will gauge what type of employee you are based off your credit score. Your ability to access financial services at reasonable rates. Your ability to, so if you're living in public housing and you have aspirations to potentially one day get to market rate housing, so assuming that you're living in public housing, You get a great job, you make more money. Yes, I could finally move, but then there's another impediment, your credit score. So the challenges are vast, right? But we believe that those sitting in this room could help that. And there's also a huge opportunity, and I think partnerships such as with Tower, we've began to eliminate some of those barriers that I just mentioned. Also through the partnership with Equifax, as well as just some in this room that we could collectively figure out how we begin to kind of remove those barriers and make it accessible pretty much to everyone. And as Wole mentioned, the ability to leverage technology and the fact that almost pretty much, I think Chris said, like 1.5 phones per, just in this room, but just in cell phone penetration in the United States is very high. So if we could just leverage technology and make it just like turning on your phone, there's a great opportunity, and we definitely could make it available to everyone.
What do you want to add?
I've got nothing more that I want to add, except to love to get some feedback from the group and have a conversation, but I'll leave it to you, Esther.
Absolutely. So why don't we open it up? Are there any questions or comments to what has been put on the table? Let's
Thank you. It's interesting that what you're presenting on. In Milwaukee, we have what we call a NID. It's called, that's an acronym for Neighborhood Improvement District. And that the Neighborhood Improvement District is funded through tax collection from the city, and a certain portion of that tax is given back to a geographical location within a zip code and area. And that money is also controlled by residents that's elected to the NID board to decide a platform as to what are the needs of that community to help improve that community. One of the NIDs that I'm personally involved with as a co-chair is the Washington Park Neighborhood Association, Neighborhood NID. And one of the things that we have is a quality of life. What we did was a study for 5 years and came up with actionable items and things that we'd like to address throughout the community. Getting the NID is a little bit difficult. You have to have 50% of the residents or homeowners to vote to approve it. So in our district, that happened. And one of the things that we have under there is a quality of life initiative, and what you're suggesting in your program and the Washington Park NID would be approved for funding to do that, because that, we have a large, I say probably 60 to 70% of our residents are renters, and helping them repair their credit is a big challenge. And in Milwaukee, predatory lending is very high. The rates is over 400% when you're talking about a payday loan, and we have a substantial amount of people in our communities that have these payday loans. And I think having the education piece and being able to walk them through what they need to go from renters to prospective homeowners is something that we're definitely interested in. So I don't know if other cities or municipalities have a NID available to them, but I would think that that would be one thing that you guys may look into in the different areas that you work in to see if there's already some funding there to do things like that.
That's a great idea. Yeah, so we thank you for that.
No problem.
We'll connect afterwards. An American Family is also in Milwaukee, and we've been spending a lot of time talking to them, trying to figure out a project to do in Milwaukee. So this might be an interesting way to do it. But that's a great example of public-private partnerships, and from a funding perspective to help for the better good. So that's a great example.
You may have touched on it already, but one thing I wrote down was when you're talking to people to try and get them to sign up for this, how would you approach, say, like an investor, or not necessarily a nonprofit, but how would you, say a LIHTC investor, to sign up for this or get on board to maybe push it with their units? What are some of the benefits for that level?
That's a great question. And quite quite frankly, the pitch is different depending on who the audience member is. So in the case that you're talking about, so let's say it's an investor, let's say it's a property manager, let's say it's an owner. The value prop essentially is, one, you would increase your rate of on-time rental payments, because if a tenant knows that this could actually either positively or adversely affect them, you incentivize them to pay on time. So that's one. So for a property manager, they're increasing their cash flow, right? Particularly, they're increasing their rate of on-time cash flow. Two, people will now be incentivized to actually pay. So if somebody is actually trying to move out of, let's say, public housing into potential home ownership, people are more likely to pay on time and increase your rate of collection. So if you think about very large property managers, and let's say they average a 90% collection rate, we believe, we haven't been able to prove it, but in time, we believe that we could raise that by potentially 1 or 2 percentage points. And for a very large property manager, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars that you could claim just by being able to offer some additional service to incentivize people to pay their rent. And there's also a competitive advantage piece that if, as a property manager, landlord, whomever, you can say that, hey, in addition to shelter, in addition to community, I could also help build your credit. You just essentially just made your property or your listing, just added like a big yellow bright star to it. So the benefits for property managers, landlords, we believe are vast, and they should take advantage of it, particularly just to be able, because essentially at this point in time, property managers and landlords have essentially been the gatekeepers. So without their buy-in, we can't get to the underlying tenant. So we're very focused and very intentional about laying out what the benefits to the property manager are so we can get to the tenants which ultimately we want to serve.
If I can just add one other just quick piece. So there was one example of an investor that we're talking to that actually has to make its case to its tenants when they're buying a particular property. And when they're making a case to their tenants about when they're buying that property, to be able to say they offer rent reporting becomes a reason why that tenant association would approve the sale of that property to that particular investor. So it becomes a real differentiator when you're trying to buy property. That was the case in Washington, D.C., I think.
In D.C., before they could sell the property to whomever's trying to buy it, they have to go make a case to the tenants, and the tenants have to vote for that new owner. And they found our product and our service and our offering to be that compelling thing that they can offer, and that really differentiates them from any other person that's coming and just buying the asset.
So I want to react, Stanley, to what you're saying, because I agree on like kind of the drivers, and we talk about the value prop for why landlords want to do it. And from my perspective, you know, we don't have 100% traction yet, right? I mean, we want to see much more of that. As I've kind of chewed on the problem, I think it's like a kind of a macro, micro issue in my mind. I think generally we would say that we believe that, yes, it's the right thing to do. But are we to the point yet where individual landlords say, yes, that's the right thing to do, and I'm willing to do something about it? I'm willing to incur costs, change behavior, change practices. How do you take it from a, yeah, that sounds the right thing to do, and I'm going to do something as a result? And even from customer perspective, I think many tenants, you know, those are people who understand it, right? And we still have education to go. I think a lot of people would say, yeah, that sounds right, but are people yet making a walkaway decision to not rent at a place because there's not a rent reporting option yet, right? So it's like macro, yes, micro, no. The thing that's micro right now is as soon as a landlord or a property management company starts reporting, they immediately have FCRA obligations and costs and exposure, right? So it's like the burden is micro, the benefits are macro, and so how do we usher in the near term to make it micro benefits? Because long term, I can prove the case. You know, if we have more data on the credit bureau, right? We've already proven that the credit scores can improve, more predictive decisions. the more data that you get of a particular type, the more, and this is a little geeky, but the more specific you can start to calibrate solutions around that type of data. You can build out attributes, rent specific models. But until we get to that tipping point, how do we change the value props so that they're specifically relevant to landlords?
Yeah, and that's sort of where I started a little bit, which is why I think we have to have a conversation. And I think it might be a tri-party conversation. If you could have a tri-party conversation that says, you're the credit bureau, right? And so you're the collector of data, and continue to demonstrate how you handle the data with the impact, check. That's great. That exists. I think you've got individuals who either are responsible for rent rolls or fulfill rent rolls. So that's code for Yardi, who helps fulfill rent rolls, or the housing authority or landlord who have the rent rolls. Check that box. If you can create a layer, which is us or anybody, right, that could be the ones that are taking care of the risk component of it, and so that the landlords, because at the end of the day, what we see is housing authorities have no cash for extra kind of stuff, right? And we're seeing that landlords are not benevolent from the vantage point of thinking about eating into their margin, because it's a low margin business from a rent collection perspective. And so they're just like, tell me again why I'm going to do this. And even if I get there intellectually that it's the right thing to do, I don't want to take on the risk. So that's where a third party comes in like us, that sort of says, hey, we'll manage that risk part of it to ensure that you're not jeopardizing yourselves and you're not jeopardizing the tenant. And that's why if it's in the onboarding process and somebody gets the rent rolls, and when they write that first check they want to have their rent reported, that I think brings down the barriers and it helps people to adopt it easier. Because what we're finding, and this is when we started, we're like, oh, we'll charge people for it. There are companies out there that charge like $100, $50 to report their rent to the credit bureaus, and that tends to be on higher end properties. We started not $100, we were like $2, $3, and then we were like, this is ridiculous because people just don't want to do that. So we're at free, but if we can embed it in an infrastructure and de-risk it for people in terms of the credit bureaus, the landlords, or the housing authority, and we can be and I spent 5 years at Willis, Chief Operating Officer of Insurance. So when people talk about risk, I immediately go into insurance mode, and I think there are ways to mitigate that risk and offset it, but you got to do it in a thoughtful and cost-efficient way. And we are developing a regulatory bent to understand what Stanley keeps us out of trouble when we pitch these things. Because people ask the question, what if I stop paying my rent? And how's that going to impact my credit score and that kind of stuff? So I think from my vantage point, to answer your question, it's a 3-step process in terms of a 3-party process with the customer in the middle. So all the customer has to do is like fall out of bed and say, I want to start reporting my rent, and that just happens automatically. The one thing I would say, so a friend of mine who just left, but was the head of mortgage at Chase. And I said to him, hey, how valuable would it be if we had rent data, not even the credit score, in addition to the credit score, just straight up rent data in the mortgage underwriting decision. He said, that would be great, because we have done our own homework to figure out that rent payment history is the best metric, not the best, it's an important metric that would increase the likelihood of someone getting a loan or mortgage, but we don't have a systematic way to do it and get that information. Selfishly, we're sort of like, hey, if we could create, just for the banks, in addition to the credit score, there's an individual and you could say, hey, I'd like to know how this individual paid their rent over the last 3 to 5 years in a very systematic, easy way, you might have a business there, actually. But no one's in a position yet to create that aggregated data. And I think in this room we could create something that's interesting like that and create a nice little business that would complement what the credit score provides just for an underwriting decision, because they're starving for that data. It would mean more people would get mortgages at a lower cost. That answer your question?
Okay, I have a question. How are subsidy 100% payments reported? Subsidy payments, and then how are split subsidy payments reported? Because if the tenant is not really paying it, but the agency is paying it, and they opt to, sign up for this, how would that be reported? Especially if the payment it may be late or delayed for whatever reason.
So I'll start with 100% subsidies and then move up to partial subsidies. So can you hear me? So I said I'll start with 100% subsidies. That person isn't eligible to report. They have to be paying something, even $1, just to show that they have shown a demonstrated ability to pay something consistently, right? So that's just unfortunate. But if there's a partial subsidy, let's say someone living in Section 8, 80/20, that 20%, as long as someone's paying something, that's what we will report. There's some other questions. Late payments? Yes. In terms of late, there's various definitions to late. We go by the definition that the bureaus have provided us. And late is referred to 30 days past due. So as long as a payment is made within that window, we report it as paid on time.
Can I add to that before we give it to Donna, to my other friend from Cleveland? If you want to, I know this is an Equifax forum. Love Equifax. It's tattooed on all 4 cheeks. In order for it to be, so we're able to report to TransUnion and Equifax. But we give Equifax exclusives. But if you want to report to all 3 credit bureaus, yeah, the third one requires the product to be integrated with the rent rolls, because their view is they want to see the transaction, see the payment in order to report it. So I just put that out there as just as something to think about. Again, if the broader goal is to, we want an Equifax data set that is as rich as possible, check. But if in that process you say, hey, I want to have all 3 bureaus have access to the data, then it really requires this integration that we're talking about if you want to make it available to all 3 bureaus.
So I used to, in my previous role, I ran public housing, the voucher program for the 7th largest housing authority in the country. So my managers used to, as we used to say, hide units. When a tenant potentially would move out, depending on if it's the end of the month and the subsidy was coming in, they at times will, process their, I'm using my words lightly as we record, process their move outs late, right? And then sometimes they'll forget, and then a potential tenant moves into another subsidized unit, and then they're like, I moved out, and then this has become this big cycle. So I've been thinking through, like, what does this conversation around capacity building for organizations to say that this is a really important thing that could build wealth and create opportunities for people who live in your housing stock, knowing that you have all of these other program requirements that you're wrestling with to ensure that you can continue to operate that housing stock.
So I'm a little slow, so I apologize. So everything you said I agree with. What I'm trying to figure out is what the question is that I'm responding to.
I think I think about HUD in particular, or housing authorities in particular. We have some here.
Yeah.
Who have really large programs. And there's something that we have to do differently with, especially property managers, for this to be really seamless and benefit the end user. So what does that look like?
Got it. Sorry, thank you. And Sandy will give you the better answer. But so when you're working with housing authorities, is my experience, is that you have to solve a problem that they've got, right? And so if you can solve a problem that they've got, then we can have a conversation. But if you just show up and say, hey, I want to do rent reporting, they're like, great. But I got 99 problems, and that's not one of them, right? And so what we've figured out is we've approached it in one of three ways. One is on our platform, we'll say, hey, we can help you collect your rents from people more efficiently so you can cut down on the time that people in staff spend collecting, processing payments, and we can move that into a digital thing. And oh, by the way, you can do rent reporting too. So that's one. Two has been around Section 8, right? And so what we're seeing around Section 8 housing is there's a real push in a positive way to move people forward so they can move from dependence to independence, and the understanding that access to credit scores, way to build your credit, can be a part of a program that Section 8 vouchers holders are a part of, that can move them forward into independent living. And in that context, providing our solution and say, oh, by the way, rent reporting is a part of your funding, because a lot of these Section 8 programs are getting funded to help move people away, or not away, but move people into different independent situations. We can help you do that, and here's a tool. So the way we've thought about it is it's got to be sort of built into something else that's solving what they're trying to do, because just trying to get somebody to say, hey, I want to make rent reporting available to people is on the list, but that list is just so long that we never get to that particular topic. I don't know, Stanley, if you have a different view.
No, I echo everything that you're saying, but just to use the example of what you were saying, just to handle some of those operational concerns that may happen, but that's where we step in, right? In which that certain parts of it we have automated, and there are other pieces in which that we have a compliance team who is doing the work to figure out, hey, what has happened here? And working with the individual property manager or tenant to figure out what happened here, potentially because, as Wola had mentioned earlier, we're not, as a firm, we don't want to put someone in the worst position than they're already in. And a delinquency for rent fulfills that thing that we don't even want to step in there. So I think parts of it, you could use technology, and other parts, you still do have to use the human component to kind of do those investigations to ensure that we're serving people in the best way. It's not perfect, but we're going to get there.
Thank you. And with that, thank you so much, Stanley and Wola.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.